Right, so we're here for our 6th Think Big for release management. And Hannah, you added a couple of really good items for our agenda. We'll spend this session talking about deploy freezes. And if we have some time, we'll go ahead and dive into some of the feedback that we've received on our prototypes. So I'll let you do the voiceover and we'll get started.
Awesome. I just wanted to share some of the findings and discussion points that Sean and I went through last Friday. So I had to hear the notes and also the recording. And we pretty much were discussing, the whole deploy freezes things, MVC as is. And it was awesome because Sean just gave me a lot of insight from a backend point of view that will definitely impact the user experience and the front end. So Nathan's not here yet, okay. But I'm already discussing some of those things with him async. And I had to hear some of the learnings. The first one is that, yeah, we can definitely add a time zone to the YAML file and also represent this through the user UI. Because I had a question related to that. So if you set a deploy freeze in a period, well, how can we communicate this to users that are, on the other side of the world? And you want to hear, Jackie, do you want to voice this about the MVC?
Yeah, sure. So would we want this to be something inside the MVC, or how do we feel like the technical implementation, would it be much of a lift to add this as the first cut, or should we just implement something in the YAML file and then add this as a second iteration? I'm very open for this. I'd rather just give people the ability to have the option to set a deploy freeze. And if this is too much of a lift, then we can delay it. But it'd be great if we were able to create this context for globally distributed teams, because that's what this deploy freeze is going to be servicing anyways.
And I think there was a point that Sean mentioned about the configuration. What is it, cron, right, Sean? That it already supports a time zone, not time zone, sorry. Setting this in for the YAML file.
Yeah, so I guess cron's really designed for server management from the perspective of a server, right? And so you can put, so I guess some of the questions we had were around, blocking out holidays, for example. Or am I getting too ahead? Because you can do that in a cron, but it's, you have to go and kind of, it's a bit tricky to put it in there, but as an MVC, we can certainly support it. I guess, MVC, we can also support time zones. No, I don't see any problem with that. In the YAML. I guess the issue would be for post MVC is like, so say you've got, an organization that's got, 10 or 50 or 100, projects, and then they want to go and put in a holiday into every project. They'd have to actually go into every one. And then it would be so once they actually did that, well, even if it was 10, once they did that, then you'd have to inspect the YAML of each one to see whether it was in place or, etc. And so I think probably we'll need to eventually get to some type of page or dashboard or something that can consume all this YAML and present it, and then maybe have some type of overrides like a calendar overlay, or the ability for an administrator to override something, to put in a holiday for everyone suddenly, or a blackout period, and maybe let jobs go through when it is a blackout period. But so they're all quite a lot of features after an MVC.
Yeah, so I feel like what you're hitting on with this dashboard view would be what we would hope to accomplish with supporting releases at the group level. So
right.
Then allowing that to be like the entry point for then somebody to, we could say as an MVC that this is at least a linking option. So you can then link to your project's repo and change this YAML file rather than like uploading a YAML file at the group and having that trickle down, because I feel like that option, like instrumenting global blackout periods at the group level, would be across a lot of stages. And I don't think that would be very efficient for us. but we'll have to think about how customers are expecting to interact with that.
Yeah, because well, in fact, that's a good point what you made. I wasn't thinking about having a YAML file that got pushed down. I was thinking about kind of having a combination. So the YAML files inside the project, and then somewhere else, the pipeline checks, am I allowed to run, some type of master calendar? And that's all that came out of the feedback from the infrastructure people who were saying they have this need, they need to do calendars. But there's no reason we couldn't go forward with just starting with the YAML file. I think that would totally work.
Yeah, so I suppose that this would be our opportunity to then like dog food with the infrastructure team.
Right.
The second and third iterations, whether that's a master calendar view or not.
Yeah, well, see, they would be a good starting point because so we have a high volume application, but we don't have a lot of applications. So that's actually, it's being used and, and everything, that's great, but we don't have the problem of trying to implement for 10 or I guess we kind of have 10, but we don't have 100 projects.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that, and they seem to be pretty interested in this feature.
Okay.
And in fact, they've kind of written some stuff themselves.
Okay. Hi, Nathan. How's it going? We're just to recap, to bring you up to where we're talking about, we're kind of homing in on what is the first MVC going to include in the YAML file, and making sure that the issue description reflects like the smallest change that we'll make. So the first kind of topic that we're iterating on right now together is including in the YAML file time zones, so that if someone is in a global team, they see the blackout period in their time zone, rather than in this is PST at 8 a.m. time zone, which will be very, we want the user to have context there. So I think we've decided that we'll include that in the MVC, and I can make sure that the description reflects that in the issue.
Nice, makes sense.
And then other things that we were kind of talking about and discussing were the future iterations after we introduced the YAML file. Sean brought the amazing point that for organizations that have hundreds and hundreds of projects and they want to implement this feature across all these projects, having a single place to administer this. And I think that incrementally supporting releases at the group level will help be like a landing page for them to then jump off to administer projects. And then there could be even like a future iteration of having, the ability to configure a YAML file that then pushes down to projects in a group. So that's, I think, where we're at right now.
Also, Hannah, we were talking also about how, like, what actually are we blacking out exactly? Are we blacking out a release only to production? And then how do we define production? Can we, if there's a problem with production, do we have some way of overriding it? How does it affect the existing deployments?
Yeah, so to answer the very first question, I think we kind of discussed this in the issue. It'll be for all environments, given that GitLab kind of doesn't distinguish a production environment.
Right.
So it'll be all environments. But the very exciting and interesting part is, what do we do if there's a production failure and it's a deploy freeze? So we would need to create, like, how do you auto do a rollback, or how can we support automatic rollbacks regardless of deploy freezes, I think is probably the answer. So it's like investing further in rollbacks so that the owner or administrator can override the deploy freeze and redeploy the last successful release or last successful pipeline.
Yeah, or could even be role-based, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Because we don't want to have the situation where, there's a problem in production and then they have to push a new version of the YAML to change it.
Right.
One thought I just had, while you were talking about how it's going to be for all environments. And I guess this goes back to my question about how this would look in the YAML, because I'm kind of envisioning that each environment specification would have a sub key called blackout dates. And so you could kind of configure it on a per environment basis, but maybe were you thinking more of a global blackout that would automatically apply to all environments?
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it at the environment level like that. That it'd be more entry to do, but or we could kind of have it at both levels, like have it, for the YAML file as a whole, and then potentially have entries at the lower level that override the higher level. I don't know.
Yeah, and I was wondering if it even needs to be at the job level.
Yeah.
Because right now we might call the job deploy,
Right.
which will, SSH into the server and push some files. But GitLab itself doesn't really know that that's actually a deployment. It doesn't really distinguish between a testing job and a deployment job. So
Right.
I think it might have to be at the job level where you mark certain jobs to say this job can't execute during the deploy freeze.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
So would that really be on the runner side then?
I don't. Sorry.
No, I think no. I'm not entirely sure, but no, we put it in the. I guess we'd put it in the YAML, but Rails would then just not make it accessible to the runner. It wouldn't tell the runner that there's a job available to be picked up. And so I think we made it pretty clear in the issue that we won't automatically pick it up at the end of the period, like it just gets missed for the MVC. Anyway.
Yeah, for the MVC, then someone's gonna have to manually go in there and like re-pick it up.
Yeah.
So like the documentation should be, if you set a deploy freeze, you'll need to go back in there at the end of your period and retry your missed. And I'm not sure if we should have like notifications that say, hey, this has been, this was skipped. So like it's a to-do that's then created. You might want to consider how that looks.
Yeah, hi Anna. We were talking about something on the UI around that, right? To show that it had been skipped for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. So I looked into the documentation to see where deployments are displayed to users, and we have this in the merge request, the deployments view, the deployment details view, this and that. So my suggestion, the MVC, is that wherever we can identify that a job was skipped due to a freeze, we update like the tooltip information instead of just saying skip to skip because of deployment freeze.
Mm-hmm.
But also on the merge request, we add the information about when the deployment freeze, kind of like when it's on, yeah, when the freeze is currently active, and then afterwards change the message so that the user knows that they have to manually go there and retry that one step. Because right now, yeah, we can definitely create a to-do, but will that, for example, generate an email to users? Would that generate a task to who? Is that the system admin? Is that whoever is assigned to a specific merge request? I think it gets complicated.
Because I don't think it'll be worth doing a to-do for this, because I'm pretty sure we'll fast follow with a retry automatically feature where like once it ends, we'll run the pipeline again. Or I guess the job again, right? So is that what we're going to call this now, that it's a blackout period or a deploy freeze per job? Like how do we want to, or is it still?
So you said they're kind of slightly different meanings, right? Because
they do.
Because blackout period is more general, right? It's just like, we're just not going to basically execute what's inside this job, whatever that might be. Because, again, GitLab doesn't really know whether it's doing a deploy or not specifically. It could be anything, right? It could be just some kube control scripts or something in any stage. So,
like, are you saying that by nature of it being deploy freeze, we're kind of biasing this as a actual deployment or change to production rather than it being just a no action occurring on this environment or no?
Exactly. Yeah. And we don't really have an easy way of determining that.
Yeah, because people who took the surveys which were, or took the survey, there was like 108 responses to it. Overwhelmingly, 80% cited that deploy freezes was the lexicon that they've used to
Oh, really?
right. to identify
Right.
a period of
Yep.
of execution, either to a staging environment or a pipeline being run. So, because I think in their minds, the respondents at least, and not all of them are GitLab users, but in their minds was if a pipeline's running, that it's going to result in a deployment. But that's obviously not always true.
Yeah, I also thought of a scenario when we were discussing last Friday about so say you've got this a big developer group, engineering group, at a big organization, and then they have a deploy blackout freeze or whatever on production for whatever reason, whether it could be a regular thing or there could be a problem, and they want to just hold things back for a day or something. But during that period, I don't know. I can easily see a use case where we wouldn't want to restrict creation of review environments, for example, because particularly if there's some problem and there's a reason there's a blackout, because maybe the developers and the testers are trying to solve this problem and get the code ready for as soon as the blackout period is finished, bang, then they do the actual release. So having a kind of blanket stoppage on anything deploying, well, we can't really define it anyway. So
it has to be like in the YAML file. I think that specificity per stage or environment is appropriate. Yeah. And applying a global change is not what our customers would be looking for.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
when we interviewed a customer about this, they gave me 2 examples of deploy freezes that they use. The first one, and they called them moratoriums. So this first customer said, when I am redoing my QA environment, because apparently they have to pull a copy down from production, anonymize the data, and they don't want people deploying to that staging environment. So they put a moratorium on that, and they let people know that they have to spin up their own feature branch in order to test their code, and then they can deploy to the test environment once it's available. The second use case is once they have like a company event, which they would have weekly company events, they employed a moratorium on Friday to Monday.
Right.
So people would be deploying all through staging, which would be, and it would skip production. And then they would have to go in and manually rerun the pipeline for all of those merge requests. And they mentioned that that was kind of a pain because then they would have a bunch of merge conflicts that they would have to reconcile. So we kind of have to think through, like in these use cases, do we advise using merge trains with deploy freezes to avoid a time where your master wouldn't be green?
Yep. Yeah, we could. Yeah. But I think that, the simplest case is just to have it at the job level, and then it's user defined, right? What that environment actually is.
Yeah, we might want to. I'm just thinking through all the different ways that we could do that, and one implication of doing it that way, which I think makes most sense to me. But now we could theoretically have a pipeline that has multiple different deploy freezes. Like one job has a certain deploy freeze and another one has a different one. Like it's an edge case, but it would make it hard to show in the UI, like determine what is this pipeline's. The pipeline doesn't really have a freeze. It's that job has a freeze. And I know we were planning on showing kind of at the environment level what the deploy freeze is, but that doesn't really line up with how we'd be specifying it in the YAML.
I don't know if we can do it at the stage level, but would at the stage level work?
I think maybe. Yeah, I don't know if
I'm not sure if we
have
support
the ability to. Yeah. I'd have to look into that. So that was another idea. A third idea I had too is that we could maybe tie into only accept. Those are like conditions that a job is run. And maybe right now we already have some special values like merge requests. You can say only run this job for merge requests. So we could say accept, run this job except if there's a current deploy freeze. And then that deploy freeze could be defined maybe globally or even outside the YAML, if we didn't want to manage that deploy freeze inside the YAML. But then we're still there's kind of a hybrid approach there.
Yeah, I mean, the outside the YAML approach could work. Like, if we have as we're talking, some type of dashboard, we could just have a settings area, and then the YAML could just say use these settings or use this calendar, and then that could just be defined elsewhere.
Yep.
I think that could be super powerful if, because Sean, I think you were mentioning this, but an example where there may be like an emergency where you need to, like, let's black out right now, folks, right away. If they had to go edit the YAML file to do that, that would be kind of a bummer. But I think the dashboard you're talking about, plus maybe Nathan's idea of just adding except if, and then it can go check this kind of settings area, right? And then you have full power to, it's there in the YAML one time, and then you edit it over here. That's really cool. Yeah.
And that also gives you the flexibility to kind of define an environment level or kind of a global level blackout window. Like you could have an instance-wide blackout, and then every project can tag their jobs with except deploy freeze or whatever we want to call it, and then you can manage it in one spot.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay. So I wasn't following everything in that because my YAML knowledge is not like super clean. So I might need help with updating the actual issue description if the requirements are different than what we're saying. Because reconciling the issue right now, it sounds like I should make the update for we want to be able to specify time zones. But I think like that's just more like technical proposal details that we should just add. But it's like the acceptance criteria we have today kind of maps exactly what you guys are saying.
It does actually the scope though, because we have to then have another place to house all that stuff.
Right.
Like would we maybe start with only in the YAML and then move up to something bigger?
I'm okay with that. Yeah. I think as long as the ask is we want people to be able to set a deployment freeze for any given environment. So that's what our customers have asked for. But we've just discussed that environment's kind of a tricky word because the environment doesn't necessarily have the rules or the logic that would prevent a deployment.
Yeah.
That's actually at the job level. But the customer is looking to experience it at an environment or a stage. But we can provide like the guidance in the system to show that like in the YAML file for this given project, you're going to specify when a deploy freeze is active. And the deploy freeze is going to be applied to relevant pipelines for this YAML.
And so from the UI perspective, Nathan, I guess what we will need to do is, I guess we need to make sure all this is exposed to the API. And then whenever the page is loaded, there'll have to be a call to check the YAML. I don't know if that'll be expensive, but that would be the simplest way. And then put this banner or whatever it's going to be saying there's a blackout period.
Yeah, that's the one difficulty about storing the blackout information in the YAML, is that we then have to reference it just to display in the UI, which is a little odd.
And possibly more.
Yeah, the more I think about it, I kind of like the more I think about I kind of like the idea of storing the blackout dates outside and then just referencing them from within.
Yeah, I do too, actually.
They're two different approaches, and I kind of pushed for the other one earlier. So I'm switching sides.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
No, I think this is where like originally, Nathan, we only had this conversation with the UX experience, which is like, hey, people are used to specifying this in the YAML file. CI/CD is all in the YAML file. But now we're learning that, well, from a backend perspective, it's going to be it's not going to be as performant as it could be if we store this outside of the YAML file. So I think it's okay that you're
well, we do have some precedents as well, because like, for example, if the simple, I'm just thinking, what would the simplest version of this be? And would be maybe add another one of those accordions in the configuration that have, you know, blackout period or something, and, you know, and just have a simple, you know, relatively simple form in there. And because if you look, for example, just like merge trains, for example, you know, that behavior is, well, a lot of the behavior of the CI is not actually only in the YAML. It's also driven by settings in these, you know, in this settings area. So it's not really, and then we would just have like, only accept or something pointing to that page. I think that would work.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Isn't it nice too to pull this out of the YAML so that if you need to make an emergency change, you don't have to edit the YAML file?
Yeah. So then you would just have at the job level that it could be controlled by the configuration. Yeah.
So it's like set the YAML up one time, and then you can on the fly change things as you need to through the settings. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that feels consistent too with how like CI variables work.
Yes.
Like it's kind of this external data that you're referencing from the YAML file.
Well, in fact, if we also somehow hook it into the CI variables, that could be the way to have the override. Right, like the override can just be a CI variable.
That. Yeah. Sean, look at you. Look at you, Nathan.
Well, no, it's Nathan.
Look at you guys.
And Hannah as well.
Think big. We're doing it.
Yeah, I think that would do it.
I like that, to override the deploy freeze too. That's a really good idea. So I'm going to find that issue and comment at you, Sean, for, hey, can you elaborate on how you think we can use CI variables? And then we can expand that in that proposal. As far as what I need to do to update this deploy freeze MVC, it sounds like we have the work that has to get done in the YAML file, and then we need to create another issue that talks about the settings page. Is that correct? Because the form has to have, the form could be, you know, relatively complicated, right? Because, you know, you got to have repeating dates and then times within those dates. So, well, you might just have times, because you might have a blackout period, you know, every day from 7 p.m. to 8 in the morning or something. But then, so, you know, regular cron stuff, but then, well, we could just use the cron format. We could have a field and just put cron format in there. And then we also need to incorporate dates and then you might have repeating groups, right? And then all that would roll up to one setting, one named setting, holiday calendar or something. So you know, it's a relatively, you know, you could do it just as a Rails form, but it'd be a relatively complicated form, you know, 2 or 3 levels.
We also could, if we were interested in simplifying it, might make sense to not do the cron part as part 1, and we could even just have like a more of a calendar view or like date pickers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That would be less useful because you'd have to go in, you'd have to like update a year's worth of blackout dates and then come back and keep doing it. But that might be a short-term solution.
Yeah.
Would that be the lower hanging fruit, to do that first and then implement the YAML?
Well, we'll need to make the YAML aware of the blackout dates regardless for there to be any kind of functionality. So I think there will be some component of YAML editing.
So when I spoke to users, this is a feature that's pretty like 60% are the technical team, the build managers that are implementing deploy freezes, and 40% have to interact with deploy freezes. So this is one of our first feature sets where we start noticing the bifurcation of GitLab's users being front-end dominant versus wanting to use everything in the YAML file. But since the split is still fairly technical, I am almost leaning toward we should do the investment in the YAML file first. But I'm open to your guys' thoughts. I just wanted to share that in our user interviews and in the survey, we learned that build managers compose up the release manager persona about 60%. And most of those are working with APIs, developer centers, or YAML files.
Well, would it be worth to not necessarily do a POC, but to, in the issue, just kind of like go through, we're gonna change this page, and then kind of think it through, like not a full MVC or spec or anything, but we could even do a wireframe maybe, because when we start to think about dates and times, it can get complicated, right? When it comes to forms, and just to make sure we're not missing something, because I think if we go one direction, then we'll probably end up staying on that direction, right? So
yeah, yeah, and I want us to make the most informed. When we validated with the users the YAML file with the option to have like a date picker, that was very, very salient with them.
Oh, really? Okay.
They agreed that would be a really great option. But we didn't build out mocks, and we didn't put mocks in front of them. This is more like, hey, conceptually, would having a YAML file configuration satisfy your need for being able to set deployment freezes? But when we look at the second and third iterations, I thought that we'd be expanding more into the UI anyways.
So I read somewhere, and I it was kind of when I was onboarding, and so I can't quite remember where it was, that at one stage there was the YAML file was a UI, or there was, it was, and so I guess maybe I should try and find that, because that, why did we make the decision to go all to YAML, and away from pages? There's probably flexibility, but
yeah, I'd assume the main thing would be like being able to version control it and treat it like code.
Right.
Of course, yeah, that's actually a very good point. Yeah.
Right.
But the question is whether, is there any benefit in version controlling our deployment dates? Like, I don't know if this might be a piece of data that doesn't need to be in version control.
Yeah, I mean, when does it stop being information about how to build an application versus how we're running the application? They're two different things.
I like this question. That's a very valid point.
Like, it's really talking about operations, right?
Yeah.
I think regardless, it's probably worth writing down all these proposals, because I think there's two distinct ways. One is kind of what we're talking about, where we configure the dates outside and then reference it in the YAML, or we do everything in the YAML. We include the dates in the YAML. And then the question would be like, where do we put that? It probably is worth digging a little further into this issue and actually putting all those proposals down, just so we can think through them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even to work through some examples, like the weekend example, the emergency example, the holiday calendar example.
And also for the UI and UX, everything is going to differ. If we go, for example, with the job only approach, job first, then it's completely different from the current proposal. So it'd be nice to get a sense of the edge cases.
Yeah, because I feel like our current proposal, Hayana, like what you have built out in our prototypes, satisfies what our validation confirmed, as the need and the problem that we're solving. But I do think that we were looking at just a sliver of what customers are using things like Xebia Labs to do with deploy freezes. So the biggest use case for moratoriums or deploy freezes were reoccurring times or holidays. So I wonder if we should just outline all the different proposals and then select for the MVC what use case we're going to tackle first, and confirm that how much it differs from the proposal that we had outlined today.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to comment at you guys. Does that sound okay?
Mm-hmm.
What next? I think we have like 3 minutes. This meeting always goes by so fast for me.
Learned so much. Can you touch base just on the comments you already left on the other topics, Jackie? So for example, setting multiple periods at a time, if we should, I mean, yeah, we're gonna look at the whole thing again, but if we should consider those points on multiple periods at a time for the same environment, job, or whatever. And if we're going to, maybe this is something for us to validate with users or show upcoming blackout periods, if that's the case, also on the user interface. Yeah, but I think we need to have a conversation again. Sorry, I went like, okay, never mind.
You just talked yourself out of any voiceover that someone had to do. You're like, nah, we're just going to re-talk about it. Yeah. So when I look at like the things that we currently have today, Hayana, it looks like it's just the date picker, right? From an MVC side, right? Okay. In the front end. And that date picker was going to reuse a component that we already have available to GitLab library, right? And then it was going to be fed from the YAML file, like the date specified. Is that correct? Was that the assumption?
You mean on the settings page?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it really depends if we're really going to set only date, but not time, for example. And if we're going to do anything related to time, I think we need to customize the date picker component. I don't think we have the ability to set time at this point through the UI.
Okay.
Is that are we using a library for that, or is it some completely custom component?
The date pickers?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're using Vue Bootstrap Vue. That's basically the Bootstrap date picker, and then we wrap that version in our own GitLab UI library.
Okay. And so does it have a time component? We're not using it.
That one doesn't.
Right.
No, I think it's just a date.
Right.
Okay.
On the related, I'm looking at that. So is it the deploy freezes for environments MVC issue? Is that the one?
Yes.
So I'm looking at the designs for that, but none of the designs have a date picker in them. I don't know.
No, because this only covers the YAML, and then in the front end is showing users when the deploy will happen. So it's really the notification part of it, let's say.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, this is the driven from the YAML
right
perspective here.
Yeah, like the actual MVC issue didn't have a date picker in it. Yeah. Okay, we're at time, but I think if we can iterate on the MVC issue, I would like to get this buttoned up before we kick off 12.10, obviously, because we're supposed to be shipping it then. So let's hammer down on what makes sense. I'm inclined to do what's the lowest hanging fruit that enables our users to have deploy freezes in GitLab. So whatever you guys think is the best technical implementation for that, I'm happy to make sure the requirements meet that need. So just let me know what I can do to help make that clearer inside the issue description. But I really look forward to hearing more about your proposals and different options, and let me know how Hayan and I can help.
Okay.
Sounds good. So I'll probably add some proposals just straight to that issue. Does that make the most sense?
Perfect.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Y'all are awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.